or jury panel, was there anyone who was not able to adhere to the court's instructions about doing any research, looking up anything, or discuss anything about this case with anyone? Seeing no hands, we're ready to proceed. I will at this point have the jury clerk come down and swear you in.
Please stand.
And raise your right hands.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will well and truly try the issues between the state of Florida and the defendant, Wade Wilson, and render a true verdict according to the law and evidence?
All right, thank you. Please be seated. All right, then. So are we ready? Is the state ready to proceed to trial today?
State's ready, Your
And
Honor.
is the defense ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been selected and sworn as a jury to try the case of the state of Florida versus Wade S. Wilson. This is a criminal case. Wade S. Wilson is charged with count 1, first-degree murder, count 2, grand theft of a motor vehicle, count 3, battery, count 4, first-degree murder, count 5, burglary of a dwelling, and count 6, first-degree petty theft. The definition of the charges will be explained to you later. The state's charging document, which is called an indictment, is not evidence and is not to be considered by you as any proof of guilt. It is the judge's responsibility to explain the law to you. It is your solemn responsibility to determine if the state proved its accusations beyond a reasonable doubt against Wade S. Wilson in accordance with the law that I provide to you. Thus, the province of the jury and the province of the court are well defined and they do not overlap. This is one of the fundamental principles of our system of justice. Before proceeding further, it will be helpful if you understand how a trial is conducted. At the beginning of the trial, the attorneys will have an opportunity, if they wish, to make an opening statement. The opening statement gives the attorneys a chance to tell you what evidence they believe will be presented during the trial. What the lawyers say is not evidence, and you are not to consider it as such. Following the opening statements, witnesses will be called to testify under oath. They will be examined and cross-examined by the attorneys. Documents and other exhibits may be produced as evidence. After the evidence has been presented, the attorneys will have the opportunity to make their closing arguments. Following the closing arguments by the attorneys, the court will instruct you on the law applicable to the case. After the final instructions are given, you will then retire to consider your verdict. You should not form any definite or fixed opinion on the merits of the case until you have heard all the evidence, the argument of the lawyers, and the instructions on the law by the judge. Until that time, you should not discuss this case among yourselves. Your verdict must be based solely on the evidence or lack of evidence and the law. I now instruct you not to communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, about this case. No communication includes no emailing, text messaging, tweeting, blogging, or any other form of communication. You cannot do any research about the case or look up any information about the case. If you become aware of any violation of any of these rules at all, notify court personnel of the violation. During the course of the trial, the court may take recesses, and you will be permitted to separate and go about your personal affairs. During these recesses, you must not discuss the case with anyone, nor permit anyone to say anything to you or in your presence about the case. If anyone attempts to say anything to you or in your presence about this case, tell him or her that you are on the jury trying the case and ask that person to stop. If he or she persists, leave that person at once and immediately report the matter to the bailiff, who will advise me. All cell phones, computers, tablets, or other types of electronic devices must be turned off while you're in the courtroom. Turned off means that the phone or other electronic device is actually off and not in a silent or vibrating mode. You may use these devices during recesses, but even then, you may not use your cell phone or electronic device to find out any information about the case or communicate with anyone about the case or the people involved in the case. Do not take photographs, video recordings, or audio recordings of the proceedings or of your fellow jurors. After each recess, please double check and make sure your cell phone or electronic device is turned off. At the end of the case, while you are deliberating, you must not communicate with anyone outside the jury room. You cannot have in the jury room any cell phones, computers, or other electronic devices. If someone needs to contact you in an emergency, the court can receive messages and deliver them to you without delay. A contact phone number will be provided to you. The case must be tried by you only on the evidence presented during the trial in your presence and in the presence of the defendant, the attorneys, and the judge. Jurors must not conduct any investigation of their own. This includes reading newspapers, watching television, or using a computer, cell phone, the internet, any electronic device, or any other means at all to get information related to this case or the people and places involved in this case. This applies whether you're in the courthouse, at home, or anywhere else. You must not visit places mentioned in the trial or use the internet to look at maps or pictures to see any place discussed during the trial. Jurors must not have discussions of any sort with friends or family members about the case or the people and places involved. So do not let even the closest family members make comments to you or ask questions about the trial. In this age of electronic communication, I want to stress again that just as you must not talk about this case face-to-face, you must not talk about this case by using an electronic device. You must not use phones, computers, or other electronic devices to communicate. Do not send or accept any messages related to this case or your jury service. Do not discuss this case or ask for advice by any means at all, including posting information on an internet website, chat room, or blog. What are the reasons for these rules? These rules are imposed because jurors must decide the case without distraction and only on the evidence presented in the courtroom. If you investigate, research, or make inquiries on your own, the trial judge has no way to make sure that the information you obtain is proper for the case. Likewise, the parties have no opportunity to dispute or challenge the accuracy of what you find. That is contrary to our judicial system, which assures every party the right to ask questions about and challenge the evidence being considered against it, and to present argument with respect to that evidence. Any independent investigation by a juror unfairly and improperly prevents the parties from having that opportunity our judicial system promises. Any juror who violates these restrictions jeopardizes the fairness of these proceedings, and a mistrial could result that would require the entire trial process to start over. A mistrial is a tremendous expense and inconvenience to the parties, the court, and the taxpayers. If you violate these rules, you may be held in contempt of court and face sanctions such as serving time in jail, paying a fine, or both. In every criminal proceeding, a defendant has the absolute right to remain silent. At no time is it the duty of a defendant to prove his innocence. From the exercise of a defendant's right to remain silent, a jury is not permitted to draw any inference of guilt, and the fact that a defendant did not take a witness stand must not influence your verdict in any manner whatsoever. The attorneys are trained in the rules of evidence and trial procedure. It is their duty to make all objections they feel are proper. When an objection is made, you should not speculate on the reason why it is made. Likewise, when an objection is sustained or upheld by me, you must not speculate on what might have occurred had the objection not been sustained, nor what a witness might have said had he or she been permitted to answer. During the trial, it may be necessary to confer with the attorneys out of your hearing to discuss matters that require consideration by me alone. It is impossible to predict when such a conference may be required or how long it will last. When such conferences occur, they will be conducted so as to consume as little of your time as is necessary for a fair and orderly trial of the case. Note-taking by jurors. If you would like to take notes during the trial, you may do so. On the other hand, of course, you are not required to take notes if you do not want to. That will be left up to you individually. You will be provided with a notepad and a pen to use if you wish to take notes. Any notes that you take will be for your personal use. However, you should not take them with you from the courtroom. During recesses, the bailiff will take possession of your notes and will return them to you when we reconvene. After you've completed your deliberations, the bailiff will deliver your notes to me. They will be destroyed. No one will ever read your notes. If you take notes, do not get so involved in note-taking that you become distracted from the proceedings. Your notes should be used only as aids to your memory. Whether or not you take notes, you should rely on your memory of the evidence, and you should not be unduly influenced by the notes of other jurors. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than each juror's memory of the evidence. With that, state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And the defense is ready to proceed with opening statements?
Yes, Judge.
All right. State.
Thank you. Good morning. Christine Melton was 35 years old when she died. She was found in her South Cape Coral residence, wrapped in some bedding, tied with some shirts and leggings and a bathing suit top. Her face was black and blue. Her fingernails were broken. She had marks around her neck as she lied on the floor between her bedroom and the kitchen area of her residence. Diane Ruiz was 43 years old. She was found on an empty lot under some shrubs. There's a tree just lying there. Her nose had been broken. Her hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage had been broken. She had suffered multiple rib fractures, not only front, but also in the back. Now, what you're going to learn during the course of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, is that Ms. Ruiz and Ms. Melton had three things in common. Both of them died on the 7th of October of 2019. Both of them had been strangled. And both of them, before they were forever silenced, the last person that they encountered was Mr. Wade Wilson. Now, the investigation into their deaths begins a little bit later on the 7th of October of 2019, midday. It begins with a 911 call from a gentleman by the name of Joshua Lukic. Joshua Lukic ran a business known as Mateo's Graphics. He describes his contact with Mr. Wilson. When he sees him, Mr. Wilson, the only thing he had on was a pair of pants. No shoes, no shirt, blood on him, and he wanted help. He was frantically looking to get out of town because he told him that he'd killed some people. He wanted Mr. Lukic's help. Well, Mr. Lukic does make that 911 call. Kind of spooked him a little. Cape Coral Police Department arrives on scene. They search the building. They search the exterior of the buildings. Mr. Wilson had since fled. They come across a black Nissan Versa, which is the car that Mr. Lukic says that Mr. Wilson arrived in. They look inside. They see bloodstains. They're scared. For concern of the well-being of another, they go ahead and break into that car for fear that the person whose car that is actually in the trunk of that car. They search, no one's there. do a records check. They find out that this car belongs to a young lady by the name of Christine Melton. They also find out what her phone number is. They find out where she works. They find out where she lives. They go to these locations. She is nowhere to be found at that point in time. They contact her emergency contact that she has, a young lady by Samantha. Samantha directs law enforcement to another young lady, Christine Melton's best friend, Stephanie Johnson. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where it all begins. Stephanie Johnson was Christine Melton's best friend. They've known each other for years. They came down here from Illinois. The night before, 7th of October of 2019, Miss Johnson and Miss Melton had decided to go out that night. They were going to go to a place called the Buddha, which is in Fort Myers. It's a live music venue. It's a bar. They left around 10 o'clock that night. They get there. They're drinking. They're socializing. They meet Mr. Wilson, another young gentleman by the name of Mr. Jason Shepard. Except Mr. Wilson was introducing himself as JR that night. So what winds up happening is Mr. Wilson proceeds to socialize with Miss Melton. And as the night winds down, bar begins to close. Their socialization didn't end there. So Mr. Shepard, Miss Melton, her friend Miss Johnson, and Mr. Wilson all decide to get into a car and go to Mr. Shepard's residence on Sunbury Drive. When they get there, they all go inside. Mr. Shepard's mom's there. She's not exactly excited that Mr. Shepard's bringing people home. It's late. Nonetheless, they go back towards Mr. Shepard's back bedroom, which leads out to a backyard, and Miss Melton and Mr. Wilson become intimately acquainted. Mr. Shepard and Miss Johnson go out back. They're just talking, hanging out, whatever, while Mr. Wilson and Miss Melton are getting along. There comes a point in time when they're then asked to leave. There's too much noise going on. It's getting late. Mr. Shepard's got to get up that morning. So what they opt to do is they try to get back into that car, which is a Dodge Hellcat, and it's also a stick shift. Mr. Wilson She had suffered multiple rib fractures, not only front, but also in the back. And what you're going to learn during the course of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, is that Ms. Ruiz and Ms. Melton had three things in common. Both of them died on the 7th of October, 2019. Both of them had been strangled. And both of them, before they were forever silenced, the last person that they encountered was Mr. Wade Wilson. Now, the investigation into their deaths begins a little bit later on the 7th of October, 2019, midday. It begins with a 911 call from a gentleman by the name of Joshua Lukic. Joshua Lukic ran a business known as Mateo's Graphics. He describes his contact with Mr. Wilson. When he sees him, Mr. Wilson, the only thing he had on was a pair of pants. No shoes, no shirt, blood on him, and he wanted help. He was frantically looking to get out of town because he told him that he'd killed some people. He wanted Mr. Lukic's help. Well, Mr. Lukic does make that 911 call. Kind of spooked him a little bit. Cape Coral Police Department arrives on scene. They search the building. They search the exterior of the buildings. Mr. Wilson had since fled. They come across a black Nissan Versa, which is the car that Mr. Lukic says that Mr. Wilson arrived in. They look inside. They see bloodstains. They're scared. For concern of the well-being of another, they go ahead and break into that car for fear that the person whose car that is actually in the trunk of that car. They search, no one's there. They do a records check. They find out that this car belongs to a young lady by the name of Christine Melton. They also find out what her phone number is. They find out where she works. They find out where she lives. They go to these locations. She is nowhere to be found at that point in time. They contact her emergency contact that she has, a young lady by Samantha. Samantha directs law enforcement to another young lady, Christine Melton's best friend, Stephanie Johnson. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where it all begins. Stephanie Johnson was Christine Melton's best friend. They'd known each other for years. They came down here from Illinois. The night before, the 7th of October of 2019, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Melton had decided to go out that night. They were going to go to a place called the Buddha, which is in Fort Myers. It's a live music venue. It's a bar. They left around 10 o'clock that night. They get there. They're drinking. They're socializing. They meet Mr. Wilson and another young gentleman by the name of Mr. Jason Shepard. Except Mr. Wilson was introducing himself as JR that night. So what winds up happening is Mr. Wilson proceeds to socialize with Ms. Melton. And as the night winds down, the bar begins to close. Their socialization didn't end there. So Mr. Shepard, Ms. Melton, her friend Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Wilson all decide to get into a car and go to Mr. Shepard's residence on Sunbury Drive. When they get there, they all go inside. Mr. Shepard's mom's there. She's not exactly excited that Mr. Shepard's bringing people home. It's late. Nonetheless, they go back towards Mr. Shepard's back bedroom, which leads out to a backyard, and Ms. Melton and Mr. Wilson become intimately acquainted. Mr. Shepard and Ms. Johnson go out back. They're just talking, hanging out, whatever, while Mr. Wilson and Ms. Melton are getting along. There comes a point in time when they're then asked to leave. There's too much noise going on. It's getting late. Mr. Shepard's got to get up that morning. So what they opt to do is they try to get back into that car, which is a Dodge Hellcat, and it's also a stick shift. Mr. Wilson tries to get in. He can't drive that car. It's making a lot of noise. Keeps revving the engine. Can't get it in reverse. Can't get it to drive. They opt to call an Uber. And Miss Melton, her friend Miss Johnson, and Mr. Wilson all go back to Miss Melton's residence on Tudor Drive in Cape Coral. A little later on in the morning, Ms. Johnson has to get to work. She's got a kid that she needs to get to school. So she leaves and asks Miss Melton, "Are you okay?" Yeah, there's no warning signs, no red flags, no nothing. So Miss Johnson leaves. Miss Melton is left alone Mr. Wilson. You know how that morning ended. Miss Melton, once again, with broken fingernails, braces black and blue. She had marks around her neck. She had been strangled. He then proceeds to wrap her up in some bedding, ties the bedding, ties it with her shirts, her jeans, her leggings, her bathing suit top, and tries to pull her out of the bedroom. Except at this point in time, the sun's beginning to come up. It's getting light outside. She's heavy. He wants to get rid of the body. He thinks the better of it, and then decides he's going to leave her there. He gets her keys to the black Nissan Versa. But before he leaves, he gets Miss Melton's iPhone. Proceeds to hold it up to Miss Melton's face, so that way it has a face recognition ID, so that way he can utilize the phone. He leaves in Miss Melton's car. He leaves with that phone. He proceeds to call the girlfriend that he'd gone to the Buddha with earlier that night and wanting to know where she was. He repeatedly calls. She tells him to meet her at her spa, which is located right on 1st Street. Her name is Miss Melissa Montanez. He arrives at Miss Montez's business called Nia's Spa in that black Nissan Versa. When he arrives, he makes contact with Miss Montanez. It's not nice. He's trying to pull Miss Montanez into the car. Miss Montanez tries to fight him off. He gets out. That car rolls back. It's another car. Physical altercation takes place between him and Miss Montanez. Miss Montanez isn't anything but 5'2", weighs barely 100+ pounds soaking wet. She's trying everything she can to fend him off. There comes a point in time when he punches her in the face. Blood flies everywhere. There's also a point in time when he holds her up against the wall. His hand. She can't move. People see this. People in the next building that she shares his business with see this. One of the ladies was bold enough to come out and confront him. Miss Montanez was able to get away. He thinks the better of it. He then proceeds to get back in that black Nissan Versa and leave. While that's ongoing, law enforcement is called. Fort Myers Police Department arrives. They conduct an investigation on the battery and assault that happened in front of Nia's Spa. Meanwhile, Mr. Wilson decides he's going to go to Cape Coral. He goes over the bridge, heads over into one of the neighborhoods near Hector Cafarata Elementary School. Who does he encounter? Diane Ruiz. Diane Ruiz works at the Moose Lodge. She was a bartender there. She didn't live very far away from that particular location, so she always opted and chose to walk to work. She was wearing a light blue shirt, jeans, black shoes. She also had a very colorful purse she was carrying. Mr. Wilson, in his black Nissan Versa, comes across Mr. Ruiz. Now, we don't know exactly how Mr. Ruiz ultimately wound up getting into that particular car, but if you believe how Mr. Wilson tells it, she got in willingly. But remember, Mr. Ruiz had a broken nasal bone. She had multiple fractures of ribs, and she had broken thyroid and neck cartilage injuries to her. We know that Miss Ruiz lost her purse because it was ultimately found and turned into that elementary school. We know that Miss Ruiz was actually in that vehicle because of the bloodstains that were found in that vehicle. Because we know that DNA forensics that was conducted on that bloodstain came back to Miss Ruiz. What we learn is that we know that Miss Ruiz was in that car. And what we know also, and that you'll learn, is that she was then taken to an area off of Northeast 4th Avenue, whereby her body was dumped. And there was a neighbor that just happened to live directly behind where her body was dumped, didn't think anything of it that morning because he was having breakfast with his wife, and sees a car going backwards and forwards, and then ultimately winds up leaving that location. It wasn't until the next day when he sees crime scene tape all over the place and he realizes, oh, that was the one in the same car. What we know is that Miss Ruiz had been strangled. And what we also know is that she died as a result of blunt force trauma because of the multiple rib fractures. And if you want to believe what Mr. Wilson told law enforcement, was that he had driven over her repeatedly and tried to make her look like spaghetti. You'll learn from the medical examiner's office testimony that when one drives over a body repeatedly, rib fractures are likely to occur. Multiple rib fractures are likely to occur. Now, Ms. Ruiz's body wasn't found until a couple days later. But what we know is that when she was missing, there was a frantic search for her that was being conducted. Okay? And after that search was being conducted, Ms. Melton, her search was being conducted right around the same time. So Wilson leaves Ms. Ruiz on that empty lot, underneath those shrubs, underneath that tree. Gets back in that Nissan Versa. He leaves. He goes back across the bridge, and he goes to a place called Joe's Crab Shack, which conveniently enough is just right across the street from Mia's spa. Law enforcement gets there. And the reason why he goes to Joe's Crab Shack is because he and Mr. Martinez were communicating. She was trying to get him to a particular location so that way law enforcement could make an arrest. So when he arrives at Joe's Crab Shack, you're also going to learn that law enforcement gets in contact with him there. He plays dumb. He has absolutely no idea as to why he's being asked about any type of battery. He doesn't know why about anything. But what he does do is he does manage to get away from the officer who had tried to go ahead and block him in. He wasn't snaking around. So he gets back into stays in his car, and then he backs out, leaves Joe's Crab Shack's parking lot. You all know where he headed there. He heads to Mateo's Graphics. He needs to get out of town. So now we're back to where we began. At Mateo's Graphics, when he leaves, before law enforcement gets there to search that building, he proceeds to go off into a neighborhood behind Mateo's Graphics. He goes to a place northeast 1st Avenue, which is actually the residence of a young couple by the name of Fanny Amlin. And the Amlins, conveniently enough, had just left their house the day before to go to Ohio. It was empty. He'd broken in through the back. Helped himself to some food, helped himself to some clothes, helped himself to some drink. While he was there, he needed help. He calls his dad. I need to get out of town. I need your help. Send me an Uber. While that was happening, law enforcement was conducting an investigation. They knew who he was. They were researching, trying to figure out who his next point of contact would be. They'd already reached out to his dad. They needed to know where his whereabouts are. Dad tells him, he's conflicted. It's his son, right? But he starts describing what he had done. He describes it in such a way where he's bragging. He wants his dad to feel that excitement. It made his dad sick. His dad gets the address. Tells him, I'm going to send you an Uber. Passes that information along to you, the marshals. Marshals descend on that particular location. Mr. Kent Amlin and his family Amlin are contacted and asked, hey, is this guy supposed to be in your residence? They're like, absolutely not. Did you give us permission to go in? Absolutely. His dad is encouraging Mr. Wilson to come outside. He finally does. Subsequently arrested. Now, ladies and gentlemen, during the course of this trial, you're going to hear from various witnesses. You're going to hear what they saw and what they heard. You're going to hear about the investigation that ensued. You're going to hear about the autopsies. You're going to hear about the crime scenes. You're going to hear about all of the admissions that he made, not only to Mr. Lukic, not only to Ms. Montanez, not only to his father. You're going to hear what he told law enforcement. And you're going to hear that when they asked him why he killed Miss Melton, he said, I just wanted to do it. Then they asked him, well, what about Mr. Ruiz? His response was, F it. Did you kill her? I got one down. You're also going to have DNA analysis for you. You can find those shirts, those leggings, a curtain rod. called ties. DNA comes back to Ms. Melton, of course. Also comes back to Mr. Wilson. That blood stain in the car, that's Mr. Ruiz. You're also going to find that there were 2 phones in that car. Guess who those were? Ms. Melton's. Second one, Mr. Ruiz. You're going to have phone records. Those phone records are going to show you that Mr. Ruiz's number and Ms. Melton's number were also on Ms. Montanez's number in her phone records. You're going to hear the confession from Mr. Wilson about the method of the killing, ladies and gentlemen, and you're also going to hear his admission to the actual killing itself. You're going to have photos. You're going to have videos. You're going to have exhibits to examine. When you take all of that and you put it together, the state wants you to return the only verdict that the evidence is going to support, and that is guilty of first-degree premeditated murder for the strangulation and killing of Ms. Melton, guilty of grand theft of a motor vehicle, taking Ms. Melton's black Nissan Versa, guilty for battery on Ms. Melissa Montanez, guilty on first-degree murder of Ms. Diane Ruiz for strangling, killing her, and running her over with that car. Asking you to also find him guilty of burglary of a dwelling, of breaking into Mr. Kent and Miss Fanny Amlin's residence. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you to return a guilty verdict for petty theft, for helping himself to the food, the drink, and the clothing inside that residence.
The defense is going to reserve, Judge.
Okay. Very well.